Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my LinkedIn conversation. AI in the wild should be tamed or run free. As a reminder, AI has been successfully used in multiple isolated parts of the businesses for years, but often with little governance oversight. And the arrival of ChatGPT has put generative AI into the wild, accessible by essentially anyone in the job functions. These large language models have burst into every department, tasked with everything from writing code to directly interacting with customers. And we've seen both high-profile ChatGPT wins and some fails, and which has brought a lot of urgency to the conversation around how should our organization govern AI or not. Today, I welcome my second guest, Rob Knight. Rob is Chief Product and Technology Officer at DirectID. Rob, thanks for joining me in the conversation today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's kick it off, Rob. Your company, DirectID, is a leader in open banking solutions, providing a global credit risk platform that helps lenders understand their customers throughout a credit risk lifecycle. Let's just start by, what are your high-level thoughts, Rob, in terms of how generative AI tools like ChatGPT might potentially impact this new area of open banking?
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, right? It's something that's still relatively new, and there's an awful amount of excitement around. And for me, it's still unknown, the breadth of the offering, where this could go, how it could be adopted, and what are those going to be those use cases of the future. And I think with that comes some fear from people who are trying to adopt it. There comes some lack of understanding. For me, I can see how this adoption will probably be a bit of a slower burn than people are expecting. Really, truly understanding, seeing that value exchange for consumers, businesses internally, and then moving with the times as we see things and results being proven, especially after some of those initial findings and some of those challenges that organizations have had.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing, right, to see just how it burst onto the scene, right? And you couldn't have a conversation or go 5 minutes without somehow generative AI not being mentioned or discussed. And you know, I think we're all fascinated with the technology and what sort of opportunities it provides. Um, but that has drowned out, and I've seen, like, for example, a lot more sort of reasonable and practical conversations occurring. And one of those conversations is around trust, right? And for Direct ID, and in open banking in general, there's customer trust, right? Because customers are opting and giving their consent to share the details of their accounts and all this transaction data, oftentimes years worth, across these multiple accounts, essentially their entire detailed financial transaction history, to allow better decisions to be made, right? And I'm wondering, like, from your perspective, what do you think could go well or go wrong with generative AI if you would apply it to the customer data that's been entrusted to you?
Yeah, I mean, trust is absolute paramount, right? The minute you start dealing with someone's finances, it's incredibly sensitive, right? We always need to remember that people and people's lives are at the center of some of these decisions being made. This could enable them to get a mortgage, it could aid them in getting a car. So these are big life-changing decisions. For us, trust is effectively the consumer giving us their consent for us to apply insights on top of their data to get those outcomes. Now, they are trusting us, not only with their data, but we are going to provide repeatable decisions that are going to be fair, transparent, and ethically deployed. And I think this is where generative AI, because it's in its infancy, can be quite challenging. We've seen some hallucinations on work done. We've seen promos for generative AI where it produces incorrect information. So that trust would go a bit deeper in terms of people believing that their data is going to be utilized and provided in a way that's fair for them. And I think there'd be concerns from end consumers and from individuals that maybe the incorrect decision would be made. I think if you look back in history, these type of decisions were made by bank managers, looking at people's bank statements and seeing how things worked. Things have evolved into automation. And now people trust that that automation and those processes are going to be fair. They happen in a regulated way. The minute you add in something to the cycle that could bring in error, instead of human error, AI error, it could damage that trust and then damage people's belief in the systems and in the institutions that they're trying to engage with. So yeah, it's a big, big topic. I suppose that's the one that concerns me the most. That value exchange, making sure the consumer and our customers really believe it's there.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, Robin. We're just starting, right, to understand the complexity of the guardrails that would have to be developed around these technologies. You mentioned hallucination, which is a very significant challenge where things are being fabricated, right, in terms of the outcomes, right, and not being able to really deeply understand how a decision gets made or how let's say a score got produced is a serious issue in areas like credit lending and credit risk, where regulations have enforced that there has to be definite clarity in how that's done. Moreover, that the consumer is empowered to make it, to challenge data or to change their behaviors to improve that outcome. And I think all that is things that just are things that haven't even been discussed or considered, right? Because these large language models really aren't focused in these areas. Although I think everybody, because of the excitement, you want to apply them in areas that maybe they're not natively meant to be. So, the other sort of concept is that direct ID is been in this open banking space for a long time. In fact, I think the first provider authorized to build connections to access customers' banking data. So you obviously have to take this very seriously, and you always have. But as such, being part of that open banking space, your company is regulated by the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. Have they issued any directives about the use of generative AI tools? How do they look at this phenomenon, more broadly in this open banking space?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Again, I think regulation's now playing catch up. I mean, as we've seen, there's been many global conferences held, one in the UK. You have the EU working through provisions for guardrails, frameworks, safety nets effectively that will come into force in 2025. So there's no direct regulation yet. There is an awful lot of conversations, feedback, and understanding. But regulation really is going to they're going to struggle to enforce until they have guidelines from those um, countries which they adopt in, countries in which it works. I think for us, our key is always to be vigilant, right? We can see different rulings happening. It's a very good regulator, the FCA, in terms of providing all of the different ideas and concepts that are going on. So it's a case of us keeping pace with that change and understanding how things can be adapted. I think the really interesting point is once regulation comes in, I think we're going to see a huge amount of investment in the space. I think there's been a lot of investment so far, but there's risk with that investment if you don't know that it can be fully adopted or it won't be appealed to a regulator. Once the regulators have put that framework or those guidelines in place or even those strict rules, then we're going to see an influx of new solutions come in.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. When we look at regulation, it's new to everyone, right, including the regulators. And in some sense, there has to be sort of a time in the oven, right, so that it's properly baked and everyone sort of understands the potential benefits and the potential risks. And I do agree with you that there's a much more focused view on how AI is being developed and how processes are kind of be followed and regulation put in place. In fact, I've just released my predictions blog, and one of the things I talk about is auditability, audible AI being probably one of the hot topics coming in the coming year, primarily because this sort of proof of work that has to occur and this sort of enforcement of, okay, what are the sort of very prescriptive steps we're going to take in that journey to ensure that we're either following regulation or ensure that we're following our own internal guidance, right, for governance and what each organization is prepared to take on. I think will be super important, right? And there's just too much to unwind, and I think the cautious approach is the right one here for sure. So there's the customer impact, right? And as we discussed, we have customer trust, we have customer consent, we have the seriousness of the decisions that get made, particularly in areas like credit risk and helping with their life cycle from a financial health perspective. And then there's how we use it internally, right? And I guess I wanted to turn the question around that. what's your policies? I mean, you're chief product and technology officer. What are the policies or guidelines that you're giving people internally, right? In terms of, are they able to use those tools to help with code? Are they able to use those codes, that technology to help with their knowledge? I mean, where are you on that journey? Because I've seen varied sort of directions across firms in terms of their internal adoption of these to enhance their the development processes or education of their workforce.
I mean, first and foremost, as a technologist, it is a really cool technology, right? And I think that desire to be involved and that desire to use it comes from anyone with that type of technology background. So I have people chomping at the bit, wanting to be able to experiment and see what happens. For me, it's very important that obviously we stay within regulation, but we also adhere to our compliance. So we're ISO 27001, SOC 2 Type 2, very, very good governance on change management, source control, and making sure that all of those pipelines for decisions across our environments, production, development, QAT, UAT, that they're secure, safe, and we always carry on with our policies. Now, that being said, we do need to make sure that our people internally are aware of what's coming and can actually start to play around and see some value. So sandboxing off areas, making sure that there is that play pit effectively to be able to go through, see what type of outputs you can get from this, see where the value could come so that we're better understanding the opportunities future is key. I think it's then a case of also resources, right? We have teams, we have a roadmap, we've got to make sure we do things. So provisioning a bit of time in sprints, making sure people do have that opportunity to learn and let loose is important. But it's about making sure you do have that right framework internally. You do not want to risk being in a situation where one of your key foundations or building blocks or decisions could end up being contaminated by something that someone's playing around with. So as you said, that auditability, that making sure you have control, absolutely key when you're trying to learn about something new and making sure it doesn't impact anything that you already have ongoing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with these sort of technologies, one of the best things that I've seen are people building strong fences and strong rules, right? From a research perspective, exploring those technologies and doing it, particularly where there's sensitive data in ways that are completely private implementations of these large language models, and with very, very strict sort of, guidelines in terms of the learnings being, basically cordoned off, quarantined, if you will, right, for an investigation. So there's not a leakage, right? And in many ways, that means that there's the path that we're on, right, and it's the path that's part of a model development standard or an AI standard. And then, as you said, there's the research sort of component, which everyone has to recognize, no matter what gets learned there, that it has to go through, a significant amount of further review and investigation, right? And I think, making sure that organizations do that and employees are monitored and informed in terms of how that has to occur, super important, right? I think that ability to access these technologies through the open internet is one of the more scary things. And we've seen IP leakage and other things occur in the industry, right?
Yeah, exactly. The problem is you are helping train something that's live. So, for example, let's say that you are looking to run a new bit of code or utilize some form of functionality elsewhere. You download that, you tailor it. There is that potential for that coming across and for that being utilized elsewhere. So you do have to be very protective. I think it's one of those consequences that people aren't aware of. It's one of the things that they need to watch out for. And again, as I said, this type of subtle contamination, that's also what you need to be very wary about, the accidental flows that could come in and cause an impact down the line.
Yeah, yeah. It's much like how we do, cyber training and try to ensure, employees understand what it means from a cybersecurity perspective. It's a new way of thinking about, IP leakage and other things that are very serious, right? In addition to the data privacy items. So Rob, then let's get off the hype cycle or for a bit on generative AI and let's just talk about one of my favorite topics, which is responsible AI, right? And so for me, right, responsible AI has been something I've talked about for a long time, and I know it's something that is important to you, which is around essentially ensuring that we develop models that are robustly developed, meaning essentially very carefully and thoughtfully developed, not throwing data into a cloud and spinning a model in a day, but really focused on features and variables and relationships. And then ensuring that these models are ideally interpretable, if not interpretable, explainable. And finally, going to, removing, detecting and bias and remediating models from bias, and then the auditability track, right? And much of the industry is on this sort of path to get to, model development standards and processes that they put in place. So, other than this blip, which was generative AI, that kind of took everybody kind of off the path a little bit to think about those technologies. What is your thoughts about more traditional applications of AI, where a lot of work has been done, and I guess what's your journey when it comes to responsible AI, which I imagine is more of the traditional path for you in terms of as you look to deploying these and AI in the work that you do.
Yeah, exactly. It's about making sure that you utilize the best tools available to make the best decisions. Those inputs coming in, that manipulation, applying that insight, and those consistent outputs coming in. As long as you have the same inputs in the same context, you should get that same output. And that's what we look to do in terms of explainability. Many different tools that you can utilize and approaches, even just standard calculations through machine learning, through supervised learning. I mean, I'm going to steal a phrase I've heard you talk about before, Scott, in terms of the human in the loop. And I think that's still the most important part of this is each of these building blocks. Imagine you're assembling a Lego wall. Each of these building blocks that gets you to that output needs to have that explainability in there, and you need to have that human in the loop. Sometimes you'll find some amazing features by just putting them in the cloud and seeing what happens. But if you can't understand logically why that feature adds value, it's very difficult to then utilize it and use it in a proper sense. You need to be able to have that context. And I think that's where reliable AI is really important, because it makes you take a step back. It makes you understand what's happening and then best explain it and then utilize it in a way that adds value for everyone. Going back to that trust, if you cannot say that this is a cause and effect, then it's very difficult to have trust and belief in what you're doing and then truly adopt it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And, I think for everyone listening, and probably many of them are already on this responsible AI journey and for their firms and they're listening in. But, I think it's very important that people focus on the fact that at the end of the day, we need to understand how, let's say, a model works, and we need to understand how a decision strategy works, and we need to feel comfortable that we can defend and discuss that, right? Which means that there's a level of visibility, there's a level of sort of human in the loop, right? That is really important, right? And a lot of the sort of regulation out there even talks about the fact that a human has to explain to a human what an outcome was, which means that on both sides of the equation, let's say those that providing an outcome and the person that's affected by that outcome, they need to be able to talk to each other and understand it, right? And it can't be sort of a black box, and it can't be a guess, right? Because these are really big impacting decisions. And so, I'm pleased to hear, that you have your journey on responsible AI, and it's a big part of, the way that you think about your responsibility to customers and to that consent and that trust that they give to Direct ID. Super important, right? Because if we lose that trust or we lose that ability, right, then there won't be an ability, right? The customers will not want to participate in this. And, I think that'll be a big part of this sort of consent is, customers will start to really focus on who are using responsible techniques and who are thinking about AI and machine learning as a tool, right? And using it properly, right? So not everything's a nail, even though you have a hammer. And I think, one of the things we've seen even with generative AI, when people expect it to do complex math, it's not designed to do complex math, right? It gets math wrong. And so, I think it's one of these things where, deep sort of conversations about, where do we place the technologies and what's the appropriate technology given the type of high risk decision I might be making, super important, right? And that's just being responsible, that's being accountable, that's being, someone that takes this very, very seriously. And I'm glad to hear that that's part of the culture with Direct ID and, all the trust that you're given with that open banking data. So Rob, so let's, I guess, we're nearly at the end of time here. So let's just wrap up the conversation, in terms of the question, right? The essential question. So I'll put you on the spot, right? We've kind of had a discussion around generative AI. We've had a discussion around responsible AI. Should it run free or be tamed? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And it's something I've thought about quite a lot. I think from a personal point of view and from a purely practical commercialization point of view, I think it needs to be tamed. I think it would work best when given specific problems, you tailor solutions for those problems and you give it a challenge. And then you again have that human in the loop to be able to assess how it does in that challenge and the service and value it adds. I think in reality, it's going to be both because we are definitely going to have people experimenting with it. We are going to have people who are really driving and pushing the boundaries of innovation and who are experimenting. So whether that be in academic institutions, large organizations with innovation centers, I think they're really going to push the art of possible and show us what could be in the future. I think now and probably over the next couple of months and years, it is about those smaller chunks and specific things that it can do.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Right. I mean, I think, it's interesting. We had this sort of, a group of scientists that asked for the 6-month pause. Right. And it was a big sort of controversy. I think at the end of the day, and you said it yourself, right? This technology is cool. Right. And, taking a thoughtful approach to when and how to apply that technology is not at odds with a healthy sort of admiration or interest in the technology. It's really putting our business hats on and putting our human hats on and our accountability hats on, and understanding when and where is the right time to leverage the technology. So I like your answer. It's a bit of both, right? But it's part of like allowing one to continue to bake in the oven while we continue to serve customers in proper ways with things like responsible AI, as an example. Well, Rob,
Exactly.
thank you again. This has been a great conversation, and I really enjoy your perspectives here. It'll be interesting for us to stay in touch and see how all this develops. But I think everyone's benefited from the conversation, very measured and thoughtful, and we'll see where this all takes us in the years to come.
Yeah, wonderful. And again, thank you so much for inviting me along. It's a real pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you.